I'm John Brand. I'm a director at Bowman Gilfillan Attorneys in Johannesburg. I specialise in alternative dispute resolution, and what I'm going to be talking about this morning is Marikana and its implications for industrial relations in South Africa. What I want to try to do is to, using the conflict resolution matrix, try to look at the complex and multifaceted contributors to the tragedy on the 16th of August by looking beneath the mere manifestations at the trigger, all the underlying causes and some of the aggravating factors, so that we can have a better understanding of what happened there and how hopefully to prevent further Marikanas. So let me start then with the manifestations up here. And as I say, that's what people tend to focus on. And one of the mistakes we make is to focus exclusively on manifestations, as important as they are to manage. If you don't deal with the underlying causes, you spend your life managing the manifestations. But the first important manifestation that one saw is a very significant disregard of the law. Disregard of collective agreements, both by management, I must tell you, and by trade unions. A failure to comply with agreed disputes procedures, failure to comply with the requirements of the Labour Relations Act in channeling disputes, which then resulted in an unprotected strike. The other is incredible hostility. Very great anger, very brave defiance of the authorities and of the police. Revenge, the posters there reading "Rest in peace, NUM, I'm here to bury NUM." And then dreadful violence, very high levels of intimidation, assault on one factor against the other. The other thing was the emergence of new players. The most obvious one is the emergence of AMCU, but I must just say that AMCU is not such a new player on the block. But much more challenging is small workers' committees who reject all unions and say the unions are not looking after them, they're going to look after themselves, which makes conflict resolution very difficult. Very interesting for me was the role that the church played in all of this, and particularly in the final mediation, and how involved the church remains. Then, of course, police action, which everybody is focusing a huge amount of attention on, quite rightly. Very serious allegations of torture of leaders, reminding us of some of the worst excesses during apartheid, large-scale arrests and temporary releases now while the Farlam Commission is underway. And then huge levels of grief, which are going to come back to haunt us. That's one of the AMCU leaders on the morning after the shooting. And then, of course, there's the Farlam Commission, and I don't want to spend too much time on that. That's the minister. The consequences, very briefly, just to mention 45 deaths, hundreds of people injured in one way or the other. And the biggest myth that has been out there is that Lonmin workers got a 22% increase. The truth of the matter is that the maximum increase that any worker got in settlement of the Lonmin dispute after the shooting was 7.7% to the lowest grade, because they conflated the lowest grade with a grade above it. The maximum actual increase to rock drillers at Lonmin was 3%, and that only went to a limited number of them who also moved up a grade, and only those below a certain level got a maximum of 3%. What is totally ignored is that the workers lost 12% of their annual wages in the strike due to no work, no pay. 9,000 contract workers got nothing. Every single worker lost more in wages than they gained. It's a complete fallacy to believe that those workers scored out of that strike. Direct losses in gold and platinum amounted to 10.1 billion. Coal losses 180 million. 15.3 billion lost across all mining sectors. There was a 12.5 billion reduction in export revenues in 2012. GDP growth forecast down from 3% to 2.5%. I want to just spend a moment on the trigger. What set this whole thing off? And the trigger really started at Implats, a neighboring mine of Lonmin. And what happened there, Impala Plats entered into a 2-year deal. And one of the problems in the negotiation related to rock drill operators and miners, which were the workers that eventually gave rise to the problem at Marikana as well. Impala Plats was wanting to pay the miners and the rock drill operators more, give them a significantly bigger increase than other workers, because they are skilled workers and there's a big shortage of those skills in the mining industry. But what was ironic about it is NUM spent the whole of those negotiations arguing to keep the wages of the miners and the RDOs down, because it has an ideological position that everybody must get the same. But workers are not fools, particularly not rock drill operators nor miners. And they were aware that their union, NUM, had spent the whole negotiation trying to hold their wages down. And they went to a union called AMCU. AMCU went and knocked on Implats' door, said, we represent the rock drill operators and the miners. Would you please give us an increase? Implats were alarmed because they, in the lovely days post-95, had entered into an agreement with NUM in terms of Section 18 of the Labour Relations Act, that whereas they recognised NUM when it was 30% representative, they entered into an agreement in terms of the LRA, which said that any other union that knocked on their door had to be 50% representative before they could set a foot on Impala Play, let alone negotiate. So they said, no, we can't talk to you. We have this agreement with N, go away. They rushed back to NUM and they said, we've got double trouble now. Not only are we losing our rock drill operators and our miners hand over fist, but now we've got this upstart union. Please let us pay these people more. Then there are two versions of the story. The NUM version is that they said, not at all. Stick by the collective agreement, one pay, one increase for everybody. The other version of the story is that because all the full-time shop stewards in the Platinum Belt immediately get elevated from general workers, which is the lowest grade, to the highest grade, grade 9 miners, and they were set to score big time if the miners got an increase. They said, do it, but don't say we said you could. So Implats then gave a very significant bonus to the miners, and then all hell broke loose. So they got shouted at by the Chamber of Mines, who said, you've breached the collective agreement. But nobody asks, why were they forced to do that? The rock drill operators and the miners at Lonmin said, we want the same as what was given to the miners at Impala Plats. They went out, and that was what gave rise to it. What were the underlying causes? We understand what the trigger was, and within the trigger are some of the underlying causes. And the first question I want to ask is, was it the monetary wage? Rock drill operators earn 10,000, at least 10,000 Rand a month. The average South African worker, as we know, earns 3,000 Rand a month. 59% have pension, 40% have medical aid, 77% have UIF. Few workers have all three. Rock drill operators have it all at Lonmin. 4 out of 10 adults are unemployed. Therefore, 7.3 million out of 32 million adults work in South Africa. And if you factor that in, rock drill operators are actually in the top 6% of earners if you take into account the unemployed. Rock drill operators earn more than entry-level teachers. So I just want to put the rock drill operator wage into context and say to yourself, was poverty wage the cause? Then I want to look at what I call the social wage or the social wage deficit. No formal or very, very little formal housing. They live in informal tin shacks. No refuse removal. One of the very distressing things as you drive to the mine there is that you see children scrabbling around in the piles of refuse together with the dogs. No electricity. People have to rely on candles, and virtually no policing or security. That was actually an alleged spy's house that was burnt down. No sewerage, and one of the dreadful things is that is the koppie where the slaughter took place. No education, children wandering around the township with no formal education, no formal health, and these are the conditions in which people are living. Having to rely on taxis to get even from Marikana into Rustenburg. No running water. Some of the mining houses provide a tanker to do it. Those are the roads of the area in which these people live. Now, people can point fingers. Again, government tends to point fingers at the mining houses. The mining houses point fingers at government. But whoever, nobody dealt adequately with the social wage, and you can pay people 20,000 Rand a month, but if they live in those conditions, you're asking for problems. The working conditions, very, very arduous. I mean, these rock drill operators work in about 1.5 meters of space. So there are serious issues around health and safety, huge issue around migrant labour, wage differentials, very serious problems around the use of Peromnes, Patterson and so on in measuring the worth of miners. Labour brokers, they get fed upon by money lenders. You want to see the kind of interest that these guys pay. Very, very importantly, there's a feeling amongst these people that nobody cares. Their union doesn't care, their employer doesn't care, their government doesn't care, and there's an absolute feeling of despair. Bargaining structures. Firstly, our organizational rights regime is, in my view, potentially unconstitutional. Also over-centralization, and one of the things that really distresses me is that when we should be decentralizing our collective bargaining, the government and the major unions and everybody else is pushing for more centralization. And it's really lack of tiers. Employers are hiding behind centralized bargaining because it's lovely. What they do is they don't have to deal with the union in their workplace. Bargaining skills, highly adversarial, not interest-based, poor preparation, ill-informed, antiquated, out-of-date. NUM, they became complacent because they were sitting there, no other union could get in, they didn't have to worry. Very ideological. I've given you one indication of how ideology played its part. Politicians, people said it was all Malema. Not so. He did a little guest appearance for one day, but it requires some really hard work to organize workers. We know that 25 billion Rand was lost to corruption in government procurement. Lack of tripartite dialogue. The fact that government, mining houses and unions didn't talk about what was obviously brewing is amazing. Many, many aggravators: unresolved conflict, mistrust, illiteracy and innumeracy, inaccurate perceptions, misrepresentation, appalling communication, and I think a failure of mediation in many instances. Moderators, very few. The church played a bit of a role, and eventually workers are staffed back to work. Briefly putting it into the broad industrial relations context, in the public sector strike of 2010, it lasted 21 days. They lost 6%. Municipal strike, 16 days, they lost 4.2% in no work, no pay. To take them 156 weeks to recover what they lost. The municipal workers will never recover what they lost because they didn't gain anything. Let's look at the private sector, and the strikes were 16, 14, 21, 14, 10, wages lost up to 6%. Apparent gain, but the real thing is actual loss, minus 0.6, minus 3, minus 4.5, minus 3.5, and the violence is enormous. The damage to the country, 2 billion Rand lost to fuel retailers. International comparison, working days lost through industrial action per 1,000 employees over 2005 to 2009 in the whole of Europe. All European countries, average working days lost per 1,000 employees, 30.6. South Africa 507. We have by far the highest incidence of strike action in the world, something like 10 times what the rest of the world is doing. The Minister yesterday, or the day before yesterday in Parliament, 99 strikes in 2012, 99, record, higher than any other year going backwards.
Good morning to all of you. My name is Bill Thompson. I'm a part-time senior commissioner on the CCMA and also a mediator. And I've been quite involved over the last year and a bit longer than that, but particularly the last year, in a number of disputes and working with parties in relationship building interventions. And what I'm going to be chatting about this morning is with the aftermath of Marikana, looking at, during this last period, cooperative working together between unions and management, and some of those workplace examples that have happened and some of the success stories through that. Let's just have a look very briefly at, beyond Marikana, why some relationships fail and others thrive. And what was quite interesting was when Barney gave us this topic, it was before the recent violence had actually manifested itself. And as John very clearly put it, it's not gone. And that's why we use the words conflict management as opposed to conflict resolution. We haven't resolved this. It's about managing it there. Losing focus. This was in August last year, Financial Mail's front page. Losing focus. Workers miss out as trade unions chase money and politics, something that John's alluded to there already. Then something which went absolutely viral, The Economist of October 2012, Cry the Beloved Country, South Africa's Sad Decline. And a very similar photograph to some of the ones that John has actually shown us there as well. A very sad story that was there as well. And then the last one was actually this year in February, Labour Turmoil, What's Wrong with South Africa's Industrial Relations. And I think the reason John and Barney and myself and others are involved in this field is just because we believe of the incredible potential that South Africa has. There is just so much opportunity in this country. So, does Marikana spell an end to labour relations system as we know it, or are there good news stories that provide hope for renewed stability and cooperation? Sadly, in addition to John's statistic of having the highest strike rate in the world, there's two others here. The one is being the most unequal country in the whole world. And I think we can't see Marikana or any labour relations out of that context. Poverty, the need for decent work, housing, health and education, very high unemployment, high levels of conflict and strike violence. There's another statistic, which is a very worrying statistic, and I wear a hat as a part-time senior commissioner in the CCMA as well, is that the CCMA is the busiest dispute resolution organisation in the whole world. It has the highest number of disputes referred to it for conciliation and for arbitration. This is some of the stuff that Clive Thompson, I just referred to him at the bottom here, that he said in December 2011. Some learnings from Marikana. She said, if there's non-delivery on socio-economic issues, they can manifest themselves as labour issues. And I think we see that very much at Marikana. We're in the Western Cape here. We could see that with the farm strikes as well. But government, some of the learnings, government assisted by business has a key role to play in bringing stability to industrial relations by improving poor social conditions. And as I put that there, it would be easy for me just to say that it all sits at leadership in government and so on. But if we're going to wait for that, perhaps we're not being proactive enough. New forms of worker association have emerged, including worker committees. One of the comments that did come out of Marikana is very similar to the Mercedes-Benz one all those years ago, is relying on legislation, rules, collective agreements and policies doesn't always work. If the relationships aren't working, there's high levels of mistrust, disrespect, and people really don't believe that you are sincere. So where does the power at Marikana and industrial relations lie? And so where does that leave the labour relations now? The need for leadership, government, management and union labour from all those perspectives, for collective problem solving and participative decision making, and to develop a shared management labour focus on productivity. And I've deliberately put trust in an exclamation mark right at the bottom there, because we don't just go out there and create trust. Trust happens when parties begin to believe that people are actually sincere and they really are beginning to see that stuff happening. There's a huge need to upskill managers and union worker representatives in problem solving, negotiation, and this was something that Barney had mentioned there too, early conflict management techniques. Third-party intervention, this is something that I want to say too, is before the negotiations even start, of engaging facilitators in processes, and I use the word especially now, as we sort of capacitating people to do that more and more themselves. So where does that leave the labour relations now? Create opportunities to get parties together to find the common ground, develop effective systems for problem solving and conflict management, and set up effective, credible, emphasis on credible, workplace communication forums to equip parties with the necessary knowledge and skills to participate meaningfully. This is something that Clive Thompson said, and I think this is my last slide. He just says that great and productive workplaces are those with strong working relationships founded on high levels of trust, respect, and information sharing, geared towards the achievement of organizational goals and employee rewards. Thank you very much.